The Queen of the Galactic Empire had always been a figure of power and wisdom. She was a ruler whose empire stretched across the stars, overseeing countless worlds and millions of lives. Her name alone commanded respect. But there was something deeper in her eyes, something that no one could quite place. A grief, a longing that even her most loyal advisors could not understand. For years the Queen had searched for her 2 daughters, who had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Her daughters were not like other children. They were the future of the Empire, their royal bloodline imbued with powers that made them unique among all living beings. No one knew how the girls had vanished, and no one knew where they were. Some said they were taken by enemies of the Empire, others believed they had run away. But the Queen knew in her heart that something far darker had happened. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with those who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. But no matter how many planets the Queen searched, no matter how many spies she sent, her daughters remained lost. The years had passed slowly for the Queen. Her advisors had continued their work, and the Empire carried on, but without the presence of her daughters, it felt as though something was missing. Her empire, though vast and powerful, seemed to lack the warmth and hope that the royal family had once provided. The Queen often sat alone in her chambers, staring at the stars outside her window, wondering if her daughters were still out there, wondering if they were safe. On a distant planet far from the Queen's reach lived a humble human named Elijah. He was just a simple farm worker, someone who had never thought much about the galaxies beyond his home. He lived a quiet life, tending to the land and caring for his animals. Elijah had never known about the vastness of the Empire or the dangers that lurked in the universe. He had no reason to believe that his life would ever intersect with the royal family. But that was before the girls appeared. It was late one evening when Elijah found them, curled up in a cave near his farm. He had been out collecting firewood when he saw something strange. At first he thought it was just an animal, but as he got closer, he saw that it was 2 young girls, their bodies trembling with cold and fear. They looked so out of place on his land, as though they didn't belong there. They were dressed in strange clothing, not like anything Elijah had ever seen. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, gave them an almost otherworldly appearance. But despite their strange appearance, Elijah could see the fear in their eyes, the way they clung to each other for comfort. He didn't hesitate. Elijah had always been a kind man, and seeing these girls in such a state of distress stirred something deep inside him. He took them into his home, offering them food and warmth, knowing that they needed help. The girls did not speak at first. They were too frightened, too confused. But over time, they began to trust him. They ate the food he gave them, and they slept in the small bed Elijah had made for them. He cared for them like his own daughters, doing everything he could to help them feel safe. Days turned into weeks, and Elijah began to notice something strange about the girls. They had no memory of who they were, no memory of how they had come to be in the cave. They would sometimes talk about strange dreams, visions of a faraway place that they couldn't quite understand. Their eyes would glow brighter when they spoke of these dreams, as though the memories were trying to break free from their minds. But despite the girls' confusion, Elijah never pushed them to remember. He simply cared for them, gave them the security they needed to heal. Elijah didn't ask any questions. He never pressed them for answers. He knew that they had been through something terrible, and he didn't want to make things worse. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that these girls were special, that they were important in some way. He couldn't explain why, but something about them made him feel as though their presence on his farm was part of something much bigger than he could understand. One night, as the girls slept peacefully in their beds, Elijah sat outside under the stars, thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. He had never imagined that one day he would be caring for 2 mysterious girls who seemed to be from another world. He knew nothing about the galaxy, about the political power struggles that raged in the stars. All he knew was that these girls needed him, and he was determined to protect them no matter what. Little did Elijah know, his life was about to change forever. Far across the stars, in the heart of the Empire, the Queen had finally received a lead on her missing daughters. After years of searching, she had discovered a faint signal, a distress call from a planet that had long been forgotten. The Queen wasted no time. She ordered her best scouts to investigate, to find out if this could be the break she had been waiting for. And so, the search for her daughters began anew. When the scouts arrived on the planet, they were surprised by what they found. There, on the surface, they found Elijah's small farm, and the two girls who had been living with him. At first they didn't realize who they were. The girls had no memory of their true identities, and Elijah, unaware of the Queen's empire or its reach, had never made the connection. But when the scouts confirmed the girls' identities, they realized the truth. These were the daughters of the Queen. The news spread quickly across the empire. The Queen, filled with both hope and fear, immediately made plans to travel to the planet herself. She needed to see her daughters, to ensure they were safe, but more than anything, she needed to understand how they had ended up on this remote planet with a human farmer. Elijah was working on his farm when the Queen's royal transport arrived. He had never seen anything like it before. The ship was massive, its sleek design reflecting the stars above. The moment it landed, a group of soldiers emerged, their uniforms gleaming in the light. Elijah watched in awe as they approached him, and at the forefront of the group was the Queen herself. The Queen's presence was overwhelming. She was tall and regal, with eyes that seemed to pierce through everything around her. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her power, her aura, that truly left an impression. Elijah could feel the weight of her gaze as she approached him, her eyes locking onto the girls who had come out to see what was happening. "Are these my daughters?" the Queen asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Elijah nodded, though he still didn't fully understand what was happening. The Queen's eyes softened as she looked at the girls, and for a moment, she appeared to be lost in thought. Her heart ached as she saw them standing there, confused and unaware of their true heritage. The Queen knelt down before the girls, her voice gentle as she spoke to them. "You are safe now," she whispered. "I will never let anyone harm you again." The girls looked up at her, still unsure of who she was, but there was something in the Queen's voice that made them feel a sense of peace. Elijah stood quietly off to the side, watching this emotional reunion unfold before him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The girls who had come to him as strangers were now the daughters of a queen. He had always known they were special. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. As the Queen embraced her daughters, she turned to Elijah, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You have cared for them when no one else could. I owe you more than words can express." Elijah was speechless. He had no idea how to respond. He had only done what any decent person would do, help those in need. But in this moment, he realized that his life would never be the same. He had unwittingly played a key role in the restoration of the royal family, and now his future was tied to these extraordinary girls. The Queen stood tall once more, her daughters by her side. "We have much to discuss," she said, her gaze shifting to the soldiers who had accompanied her. "But for now, let us take care of you, Elijah. You are part of this story now, and your life will never be the same." Elijah could only nod, still unsure of what was happening. But deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed forever. The Queen stood tall, her regal presence almost filling the air around her. She was surrounded by the quiet green fields of the planet where she had just found her daughters. Her eyes softened as she looked down at the girls, who were now standing beside her. Though their memory was still clouded and they seemed confused by the royal presence, she felt something stir deep within her, a sense of hope that had been lost for years. The daughters were silent, gazing up at her with wide eyes. They had no idea who this woman was, but there was something about her that felt both familiar and alien. It was as if their hearts knew the truth, but their minds were unable to grasp it. The queen understood this. She had been prepared for the shock and confusion that would come when she first saw them. They had been missing for so long, taken away from her when they were young, their memories wiped clean. It would take time for them to remember their past, and for her, every moment felt like a reunion. Yet a new beginning. Elijah stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. He was still trying to process everything. A simple farm worker, he had never imagined that one day he would find two lost royal daughters and have them taken into the arms of a queen. His life had been so ordinary before all this, and now his world had been completely turned upside down. He watched as the queen kneeled before the girls, speaking to them gently in a voice full of warmth and love. She promised them safety, that no harm would come to them, and that she would never leave them again. The girls seemed to listen carefully, their confused expressions softening. They had no words, but they didn't pull away either. The queen's words seemed to sink into them like a soft breeze, comforting them in a way they couldn't explain. As the queen embraced her daughters, Elijah felt a strange sense of pride, even though he was just a witness to it all. He had helped them when they needed it most, bringing them into his home and caring for them without question. He had never expected anything in return, but now it seemed as though his role in this whole story was far greater than he could have imagined. After a long moment, the queen finally stood up. Her daughters still close by her side, she turned to Elijah, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You have done more for my daughters than you will ever know," she said, her voice sincere. "For that I will be forever grateful. You saved them when I couldn't." "You gave them something I couldn't." Elijah wasn't sure how to respond. He had never seen the queen up close before, let alone spoken with her. Her words made him feel something deep within, a connection to something far larger than himself. But he couldn't quite grasp the weight of it all. I just did what I could," he replied, his voice low and uncertain. "They needed help, and I couldn't just leave them out there. Anyone would have done the same." The queen gave him a soft smile. "Not everyone would have, Elijah. You took them in, cared for them, and gave them the safety they needed. That makes you more than just a simple farmer." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just a man from a small world. I don't know anything about royalty or the empire." The queen nodded. "You are not the only one, Elijah. My daughters are not the only ones affected by all of this. Many people in the galaxy have no idea what is happening in the shadows. This was never just about them. It was about the future of the empire. And now, it's about something even bigger." Her words sent a shiver down Elijah's spine. There was so much about the galaxy, about the empire, that he didn't know, but he felt as though, in some way, his life was now tied to it all. I don't know what to do now," Elijah said, looking down at the ground. "I never expected any of this." The queen looked at him with soft eyes. "You don't have to know right now. I can't begin to understand what it must feel like for you, Elijah. But I want you to know that you are not alone in this. You played a part in bringing them home. And now, there is a place for you in this story." At that moment, the queen's advisors and soldiers began to gather around, their presence as imposing as ever. They had been silently observing from a distance, but now it was clear that the royal family had been reunited. The soldiers, dressed in their shining armor, seemed to stand a little taller as they looked at the queen and her daughters. It was as if they had witnessed something monumental, something that would change the course of their future. The queen turned to her advisors. "Prepare the ship. We will leave for the capital at once." "There is much to discuss." The advisors nodded, some of them exchanging looks of surprise and curiosity. Elijah couldn't help but wonder what was happening behind the scenes. There was so much about the empire that he didn't know. The political power, the hidden struggles, the wars fought in the shadows. He could only guess at the magnitude of it all. But one thing was clear. Everything was changing. As the queen made her way to the ship, her daughters by her side, Elijah followed at a distance. He wasn't sure if he should stay or leave, if he should continue his life as a farm worker, or if there was something more for him in the grand story that was unfolding. But he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward the royal family. They were like nothing he had ever known, and yet they seemed so familiar, as if they belonged together in a way that was almost written in the stars. The journey to the capital was long, and during that time, Elijah learned a great deal about the galaxy, the empire, and the royal family. The queen's daughters, still confused and unsure of their identity, were gradually starting to remember bits and pieces of their past. They spoke of dreams they had of a place far away, a life filled with grandeur and power. The more they remembered, the more they realized who they truly were. But there was still a part of them that struggled to accept their royal heritage. It was as if they had been caught between two worlds, one of a simple, humble life with Elijah, and the other of a galaxy-spanning empire that expected them to fulfill their destiny. Elijah could see the conflict in their eyes. He had never thought of royalty before, never imagined that the girls he had cared for were part of something so much bigger. But he could sense that the weight of their heritage was starting to settle on them, and it wasn't easy. The more they learned, the harder it became for them to reconcile the life they had led with the life that awaited them. The queen, too, had her own struggles. She was relieved to have found her daughters, to have them back in her arms. But there was a sense of guilt that lingered in her heart. She had failed them in the past, unable to protect them from those who had taken them away. And now, as they traveled to the capital, she knew that she would have to face the consequences of her absence. The empire had changed in her absence, and not all of it was for the better. There were forces at play within the empire that sought to take advantage of her absence, and the queen would have to act quickly to restore order. As the ship made its way toward the capital, Elijah couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had gone from a simple farmer to someone entangled in the fate of the empire. It was strange to think about, but there was no going back. He had already made a choice when he helped the girls. And now, he would have to face the consequences of that choice. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long while, Elijah felt as though he was a part of something bigger than himself. And though the path was unclear, he knew one thing for sure. His life would never be the same. The journey from the small farm to the capital of the empire was long, but the time seemed to pass quickly. The ship glided through the vastness of space, a quiet hum filling the air. Elijah stood by one of the windows, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space had always fascinated him, but now it felt different. He wasn't just looking at the stars anymore. He was part of something much larger than himself. Something he still didn't fully understand. The queen sat in the command room of the ship, her daughters by her side. They were still adjusting to everything, their memories slowly returning in flashes. The girls, once so lost and frightened, were beginning to realize the truth of their heritage. They were royal. They were heirs to an empire, and they were meant to rule. But it was not easy for them. Each time they remembered a new piece of their past, they seemed to struggle with the weight of it all. The queen could see the turmoil in their eyes. She knew that their lives had been changed forever, and she hated that she had not been there to protect them. She had failed them when they were young, and now they were struggling to accept who they were. The girls had spent so much time on the planet with Elijah, a simple farmer who had shown them kindness and care. They had formed a bond with him, and it was clear that they had come to see him as a protector, someone they could trust. But now they were faced with the reality that their lives were not as simple as they had once believed. The queen had always known that her daughters would one day take their place in the empire, but she had never imagined that the road to that moment would be so difficult. She wanted to shield them from the harsh realities of their position, but she knew she couldn't. The empire was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a world of politics, power struggles, and hidden agendas, and now her daughters had to face it all. Elijah had spent most of the journey keeping to himself. He wasn't sure what his place was in all of this. He had helped the girls when they needed it most, and now he was being swept up in a world he didn't understand. He had always been content with his simple life, but now he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't ignore. The Queen had thanked him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. He was just a farmer. What did he have to offer the royal family? What did he have to offer the empire? But as he watched the Queen with her daughters, something shifted within him. The bond between them was clear. The Queen was not just their mother, she was a ruler, a protector, a woman who had given everything to her empire. And the girls, though still uncertain, were beginning to understand the responsibility that awaited them. They were learning who they were, and with that came the weight of their role in the galaxy. Elijah could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear of the unknown. He had never imagined that he would be standing in the middle of such a moment. His simple life had been turned upside down, and he didn't know what to make of it. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just walk away. He had become part of this story, whether he liked it or not. When the ship finally arrived at the capital, the scene was nothing like Elijah had ever imagined. The city sprawled out beneath them, a massive metropolis of towering buildings and sleek, futuristic structures. The streets were bustling with people from all corners of the galaxy. Ships of all sizes flew through the sky, and the air was thick with the hum of technology and power. The capital was a symbol of the Empire's might, and it was clear that it held the weight of the galaxy on its shoulders. As the Queen and her daughters stepped off the ship, Elijah followed at a distance. The soldiers who had accompanied them stood tall, their armor gleaming in the light. They looked at the Queen with respect, but there was also a certain level of fear. They knew the power she held, and they understood that the royal family's return was a momentous event. The Queen led her daughters through the streets, and Elijah couldn't help but feel like an outsider. He had never seen anything like this before. The wealth, the power, the grandeur. It was overwhelming. The capital was a city of contrasts. On one hand, it was a symbol of progress and prosperity. On the other, it was a place where the struggles for power were always simmering beneath the surface. As they made their way through the city, the Queen's advisors began to speak to her in hushed tones. Elijah could hear bits and pieces of their conversation, but he couldn't make sense of it. They spoke of political unrest, of factions within the Empire that had taken advantage of the Queen's absence. The galaxy was a place of constant tension, and the Queen's return was not a simple matter of reuniting with her daughters. It was a matter of restoring order, of reclaiming control over an empire that had been slipping away. The Queen's expression hardened as she listened to her advisors. She had known that her return would not be without challenges, but hearing the extent of the unrest in the empire made her heart heavy. She had always known that her absence had left a void, but she had hoped that the empire would hold steady without her. Now she saw just how much damage had been done in her absence. "I must act quickly," the Queen said to her advisors. "The longer I wait, the more difficult it will be to restore order." The advisors nodded, their faces grim. They had seen the cracks in the Empire's foundation, and they knew that the Queen's return was only the beginning of the work that needed to be done. The galaxy was a place of constant flux, and those who sought to seize power would not give up easily. As they approached the royal palace, Elijah couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The palace was a massive structure, its architecture a blend of ancient and modern design. It stood as a symbol of the Empire's strength, its walls adorned with intricate carvings and holographic displays that lit up the night sky. The Queen and her daughters entered the palace, and Elijah followed behind them. He wasn't sure what his role was in all of this, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The palace was alive with activity, servants and soldiers moving quickly through the halls. The air was thick with anticipation, and it felt as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath. The Queen led her daughters to a private chamber, and Elijah stood at the door, unsure of whether he should enter. The queen looked back at him, her gaze softening for a moment. "You have been more than just a guide, Elijah," she said. "You have been a protector, and for that, I am grateful." Elijah wasn't sure how to respond. He had never considered himself a protector, but in that moment, he realized that he had been. He had protected the girls when they needed it most, and now he was standing in the midst of a royal family that had been torn apart by years of separation. He had become part of their story, whether he was ready for it or not. The queen turned back to her daughters, who were now sitting on a large couch, looking out the window at the city below. They were silent, lost in their thoughts, but it was clear that they were beginning to understand the gravity of their situation. They were no longer just girls who had been lost in the galaxy. They were heirs to a throne, destined to rule over an empire that stretched across the stars. The queen sat beside them, her hand resting gently on their shoulders. "You are not alone in this," she said softly. "I will help you every step of the way. Together we will rebuild the empire, and together we will ensure that our people thrive." Elijah watched from the doorway, feeling like a stranger in this world of royalty and power. But as he looked at the queen and her daughters, he realized that he was no longer an outsider. He had been brought into their story, and now it was up to him to decide what role he would play in it. The future of the empire was uncertain, and the road ahead would be difficult. But Elijah knew one thing for sure: his life had changed forever. And no matter where the story led, he would stand by the royal family, just as he had promised. The capital was a city of power, where the air hummed with the energy of endless possibilities. Elijah had never seen anything like it before. The palace loomed above the city, its massive spires reaching toward the sky. The grand halls inside were filled with the whispers of advisors, the echoes of a past that had shaped the empire. But it wasn't the grand architecture or the polished halls that Elijah was focused on. It was the people, the queen, her daughters, and the rest of the empire. They all had a role to play in something bigger than him. The simple farm worker was now caught in the middle of a royal family's struggle for the future of their world. The queen had spoken of restoring order, of reclaiming control of the empire, but Elijah could see how difficult the task would be. It was more than just a matter of reuniting the royal family. It was about navigating a galaxy on the brink of chaos, where power struggles played out behind closed doors and in the shadows. The queen's return was not welcomed by everyone. There were factions within the empire that had risen in her absence, and not all of them were eager to see the royal family restored. Elijah sat in one of the palace's many rooms, watching the busy preparations that were taking place around him. He wasn't sure where his place was in all of this. He had been thrust into a world of politics, power, and royal intrigue, and he didn't know how to navigate it. He was a simple man, not a leader or a soldier. He had only ever cared for the land and his animals. But now, he was part of something much bigger. The queen had made it clear that he was important, that his actions had played a role in the return of her daughters. But Elijah couldn't help but feel like he didn't belong. The queen's daughters, though they were beginning to remember who they were, still felt like strangers to him. They were adjusting to the reality of their royal heritage, and though they were beginning to accept their role in the empire, it was clear that the weight of it all was heavy on their shoulders. They had spent so many years living a simple life, and now they were being thrust into the complicated, dangerous world of politics and power. As Elijah sat by the window watching the bustling streets below, he couldn't help but wonder what would become of him. He had come to care for the girls, to protect them when they needed it most. But now they were not the same girls he had found in that cave. They were no longer lost. They were princesses, heirs to a throne that stretched across the galaxy. Their future was no longer in their own hands. It was in the hands of the empire, and in the hands of the people who sought to control it. The queen had been busy in meetings with her advisors, discussing the state of the empire and the steps that needed to be taken to restore order. The news was not good. There were factions within the Empire that had been taking advantage of the Queen's absence, growing more powerful in her stead. The Queen had made it clear that she would not tolerate this. The Empire had been built on her family's strength, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that it remained intact. But Elijah could sense the fear in her voice. It wasn't just about reclaiming the throne. It was about protecting everything she had built and ensuring that her daughters would have a future to rule. As Elijah walked the palace halls, he couldn't help but notice the tension in the air. There were whispers everywhere, guards speaking in hushed tones, advisors exchanging looks, and servants hurriedly carrying messages. It was as if the entire palace was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And in a way, Elijah could feel it too. The galaxy was on the edge of something, and the Queen's return had sparked the first signs of change. But what that change would look like, no one knew. The future of the Empire was uncertain, and Elijah was caught in the middle of it. One evening, as the sun set over the city, the Queen called for a private meeting with Elijah. She had a look in her eyes that Elijah had come to recognize, one of determination, but also of concern. She was a ruler, but she was also a mother, and her daughters were everything to her. Elijah had seen that firsthand. It was why she had trusted him, why she had brought him into the fold. She needed him now more than ever. "Elijah," the Queen said, her voice soft but strong, "I cannot do this alone. The Empire is divided, and the challenges ahead will be great. I have no doubt that we can restore order, but it will take more than just my will. It will take the support of the people, and it will take the courage of those who are willing to stand with me." Elijah looked at her, unsure of what she was asking. "What do you need from me?" The Queen's gaze held his, and for a moment there was silence between them. "I need you to be a part of this. I need you to stand with me. You have already shown more courage and loyalty than many who have been with me all along. You understand the value of loyalty, of protecting those who need it. And now, I ask you to stand by my side as we rebuild this empire." Elijah didn't know how to respond. He was just a farmer. He had no training in politics or warfare. But as he looked at the Queen, he realized that she was not asking him to lead armies or command fleets. She was asking him to stand with her, to be a part of something bigger than himself. "I don't know what I can offer," Elijah said, his voice uncertain. "I've never been part of anything like this. I've only ever known the land." The Queen smiled, a hint of warmth in her expression. "And that is why I need you, Elijah. The land has a wisdom all its own. You understand it in ways that others do not. You know what it means to work hard, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is something that the Empire needs right now. The people need to see that there is hope, that their leaders are not just figures in a palace, but people who understand their struggles." Elijah was silent for a moment, thinking about her words. He had always seen the world through the lens of the land, the rhythm of the seasons, the way the earth changed with time. But this was different. This was a world of politics and power, of war and strategy. The fate of the Empire rested on the decisions made in rooms like this one, and Elijah was being asked to be part of it. "I will stand with you," he said quietly. "I don't know what that means, but I will do what I can." The Queen nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Elijah. You don't know how much that means to me." As the days passed, the Queen's plans began to take shape. She met with her most trusted advisors, discussing strategies to reclaim control over the factions that had risen in her absence. There were whispers of rebellion, of power struggles that threatened to tear the Empire apart. But the Queen was determined. She would not allow her empire to fall, and she would not allow her daughters to inherit a broken galaxy. Elijah found himself more and more involved in the discussions, sitting quietly at the edge of the room as the Queen and her advisors spoke. It wasn't long before he realized that his role was not just as an observer. He had been brought here for a reason. His experience on the land, his ability to understand the people, was something the Queen needed. He was not a ruler, but he could see things that others might overlook. One evening, the Queen called for him to join her and her advisors in a private meeting. She had a plan, a bold one, to confront the factions that had been threatening the Empire. It would not be easy, and it would not be without risks, but the Queen was ready. And now, Elijah had a part to play in it. "Elijah," the Queen said, "I know this is difficult, but it is necessary. The people of the Empire must see that we are united, that we are not afraid to take action. I need you by my side in this. You have the trust of the people, and they need to see that we are all working together." Elijah nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment. The future of the Empire was at stake, and it was up to them to restore it. He had never imagined that he would be standing here, but now he knew there was no turning back. He would stand with the Queen. He would stand for the future of the Empire. As the plan unfolded, Elijah realized that he was no longer just a simple farm worker. He was part of something much larger, and for the first time, he felt as though he was exactly where he was meant to be.